All right. Looks like we're all connected up. Cool. Stream number 16. Let's take a look and see what we're going to be working on. It was a choice between two component refactors, either the sidebar or the month picker, and the month picker is one out. So let's jump into it. This was the sidebar that we could have refactored. Maybe we'll get to that another time. But yeah, the month picker. This is a component, just to remind folks, that lives up here. You can use it to navigate between different months of the year, different years. And when I was in the last stream, when I was reorganizing components, I was really surprised to see that this month picker does not use an instance of the modal, which is very much just an empty container that we can drop stuff into, right? If I grab an instance of this and come over to the month picker page, you can see it's that same container shape. They do have a few differences. This one has this really big shadow on it, but the beak, the roundness of the corners, which is also slightly different. We've got this odd 6.4 over here, and then here we have an 8, but they're similar enough. They, it's the same like interaction behavior, right? That, yeah, when I discovered this, I was like, this should just be using an instance of this, and we can remove the shadow. We can override those rounded corners if it's really that important. Although I'll probably just keep the full 8. I'll have to go back to the stream where I built this and see what the deal is with that 6.4. But yeah, going about factoring, refactoring components is a tricky thing, right? Especially in real life, when you've got a component library that supports a product that your team is using, where instances are, being used in local files for delivery work. Doing anything to change the main component is a little bit scary. You don't want to, the worst thing I think is that you could wipe out your teammates' overrides. And so as I go about this refactor, I do want to have a couple instances out on the canvas so we can kind of have a go and see like what the right order of operations is to minimize that risk. So we've got our 3 instances here. I'll make a few overrides to some of them, some typical things. Like first of all, we've got this placeholder year. So let's say 2023 for all of them. And we'll make a couple different selections for the months. So this is cool to kind of look back on. I really haven't spent a whole lot of time looking back on how old components were built. So each of these tiles is a subcomponent. You can see we've got January, February, March here. Each of them have a state, right, for interactions. And we know that focus from previous streams, that should probably be broken out into its own property. I will link in the description below after this stream ends about a whole other stream where we covered that. Whether or not it's enabled or disabled. So here for March, it's really hard to see, but it's getting slightly dimmer when I disable it. Whether or not it's selected, right? And then whether or not it's the current month. So let's have this first one reflect reality. So we would want to come down to June 1st. That is our current month. But, and just to explain that selected bit, I'll come back to YNAB here. So here we are looking at June, but if I wanted to look back to May, that doesn't change the fact that it's still June right now, but I can go backwards in time to review my budget from the past. So that's kind of why selected is different from current month. So yeah, let's make a couple selections like that. Let's say over here, we'll also say that June is the current month, but we are looking back to April. And this is an interesting thing. In real life, like with the real component, you wouldn't be able to do something like this, right? You can't be looking at 3 months at once. And I'm wondering now if the component properties should reflect that. If instead we should use, instead of using nested components for each tile, if we should use variants, because there's only so many options, right? There's only 12 months in a year. That is going to be a constant thing. So that way you can have, instead you would have drop downs here, like current month is pick something, is selected is pick something, and you could then never have multiple is current month or is selected at once. So something to think about for the future. All right, and this last one, we'll say February is selected. Let's just, this one's gonna be wild. We're just gonna do everything is selected just so we can have an outlandish looking one. Because this is the other thing with having 12 subcomponents here is like, there's a lot of scrolling in the design panel. This is a lot of information to be revealed, and a lot of it doesn't get used, a lot of these controls, because again, like, this is never going to happen in real life, this kind of situation. Okay, so we've got these 3 instances. I'm going to put them in a section and then lock that down just to protect it. So we'll say these are our local file date pickers with overrides. We'll lock that up. So then as we're going about changing this, we can kind of check back in here and see like, oh, did the thing I just did on the main component, did that make us lose any overrides? Great. Okay, and maybe, no, I'm gonna stick with those as overrides. I was gonna say we could do one that, and you know what, I am gonna do it. One that's really wild here, where we're like maybe being very experimental in our design. We're adding this huge stroke on something and we are breaking the background. Trying to pick a not horrible color there. So yeah, this will just be our wild one. And I definitely expect to lose those overrides because the layers that I was just adding that stroke and that fill to, we're going to be getting rid of those. Or not getting rid of because it's the parent frame, but yeah, we'll have to see. Okay, so first thing I would do here is, you know, I've got this component that I want to nest inside, and I'm not just going to simply drag this in because of the way that modal works, right? It expects content. So this is kind of already one of our top layers. What I actually need to do is take, now let's see, how is this going to work? Because here's what I'm thinking. This was my original plan. I was going to take this out, put it in an auto layout frame, componentize that, and now we've got sort of a sub-component, right? Frame 1, and I'll rename that in a moment. But that would get added in here. And you can see we've got, let's see, these are a fixed width, and this is a fixed width, but if we change that to hug, and change this to hug, then we can fix that up. So now we've got our date picker. We are missing a little bit of padding on the sides. We need 10 on left and right. And this also, I think, has a different top-bottom padding. So we only have 2 on the top, right? Because this container has its own padding, its own, interesting. These have like 8 pixels of padding. Kind of rethinking that now. But either way, there's a bunch of different ways we could get at that. So we'll separate those. We'll change that to 2. And what about on the bottom? That's 10. This is 16. And then we would remove the shadow. And so now we've got almost an exact duplicate, right? But the problem is that this is an instance of modal. If we rewrap this into a new container, like a new main component, then we've got suddenly a new component. So, and that is one way you could do it, right? You've kind of got this guy, which would be the old deprecated one, right? Maybe your team does something like putting this red X emoji in front, and then potentially adding a variant property, but not doing anything with it, just so you can have and it doesn't have to be that either, but the idea is getting this in some sort of container that you could put a background in. So that way when you're in the asset panel, and there's a great talk from Jan, oh, I'm blanking on his last name, but he gave an excellent talk at Schema 2022. I think it might have been 2021. But about these methods for like how do you kind of deprecate components, and what you end up with here in the asset panel, right, is oh wow, that was I'm getting some weird little visual artifacts here when I hover over this, but you can see that that pink background is showing up here. So just a way to visually communicate to designers, please don't use this, stop using it, we are going to deprecate it soon. I've also seen folks add descriptions, right, like don't use this. I mean, that's, you can say more and helpful things, right? But then when you hover over it here, I think that's true for both the list view and the grid view, you'll get a kind of warning. That is one approach, right? But I think when possible, a better approach, I'm just gonna take this back out, I'm going to remove the red X, is to keep the components that you have. So that way consumers can, once you publish, they will get that notification in the bottom right, that really scary little thing that says component updates are available to accept. I don't think that's the exact language, but that message. And thank goodness now, and I think this feature is maybe like 3 months old at this point, ish, but they can get a before-after difference, a preview, similar to the branching feature. And if you don't have the branching feature, because you're not maybe on the org plan, you're on team or lower, or pro and lower, I can't remember, but you'll get this kind of diff checker where you can see, and I think you can see instance by instance in your file, like if I accept these changes, here's what my instance looks like now, and then if I accept the changes, what will my instance look like afterwards? And so you can see, like, okay, am I going to lose that 23? Is it going to go back to, you know, YY, the placeholder? So that's kind of nice because folks can, with a lot more confidence, accept changes, and even if they lose overrides, maybe they're like, oh, I've only got like 3 instances of this. I don't mind going back and updating the text. It's all good. Or maybe they won't lose overrides at all. And then they're using the latest version of that component. They're compliant with the system. It's really good. It's a really important update. So that's why I'm kind of inclined to try and keep this around. So what I want to do is actually grab another copy of Modal, reset it entirely. And let's just do something wild here. I want to try and just fully insert it, right? So now we get this weirdness, but stick with me here. We still need this frame 1, and let's actually go ahead and rename that. So this would be a subcomponent. I would put a dot in front of it. If you're not familiar with subcomponents, Nathan Curtis has an excellent article about them. They kind of, in my, there's 7 types of components framework. I kind of would couch them as interface representatives just because they're like supporting an interface representative, right? This chunk here is a chunk of interface, but we're just missing that container. And we have the container, it's just over here. So this would be an interface rep. So I would still use that diamond shape. And what would we call this? I think Nathan Curtis suggests to refer to the name of the component that will get published, the one that the subcomponent is supporting. So this would be month picker content, perhaps? And we would swap that in. I'm just going to search for content and see what we get. There it is. Okay, and we're going to need to do those same overrides. Let's see. I wonder if... No, I don't want to set that to hug. but I do want to set this to hug. And I'm going against my own advice a little bit. You know, so right now, what I'm dealing with here is an auto layout wrinkle. And I call them that. I wrote a blog post about this. I'll also link to that below. But it happens a lot when you're working with placeholders, right? And you've got maybe some more complex auto layout setups where you've got things like spilling beyond the bounds of their containers or just weird stuff happening, right? Figma can't know that that's not what you want. It's just following the rules of all those resizing rules that were set up. So you kind of have to go through, and I used to like refer to this as like debugging, like I'm auto layout debugging right now, but that's actually, it's a really bad framing, really bad name for it because it's behaving exactly as it should. This is more like a wrinkle, just like when you're ironing a shirt. You might mistakenly create a wrinkle as you're ironing. The iron didn't know. It was just a goof. You know, so you can go back over, you can fix it, just like you can fix a wrinkle in a shirt. And when I say I'm going against my own advice, what I'm doing right now is making adjustments on the outermost layers, and I'm kind of working my way in. I think in my blog post, I actually say you'll ultimately save more time and build more confidence ironing out wrinkles because it's frustrating, it's hard, and it takes a lot of practice to like, you know where to look. But I very much recommend starting inside and working your way out. So let's shift gears. I'm going to stop doing that, and I'm going to go to the problem layer, which I see as container here, and I want that to be fixed, right? I just saw earlier on the main component what happens if I set that to hug. Not what I want. This was probably supposed to be a very specific 196. So I've at least ruled out that, okay, container settings are actually great. So we'll go to its parent and see what needs to happen here. It's set to fixed, which isn't what I want. That probably needs to be hug. Okay, that helps us out a little bit. And then on the modal level, this is where we remember we need to make some adjustments to the padding. So we'll do 10 on all sides except for the top. And I think that gets us in a good place. Now, we've got this really odd looking thing, right? Like this is just bonkers, but we're almost there. Now what we need to do, and this is the part where I think we're gonna, like, this is one where it's gonna be really hard for folks to get their overrides preserved, which isn't what you want. It's an unfortunate, this is an unfortunate refactor. But what's better than that first method that I showed is that this is still the same component. We're just changing all the guts, right? Everything below this like outer frame, that's what we're changing. So people still have a connection here. But I think the next move is to actually get rid of these two layers, and then we're going to completely get rid of any styling on this outer layer. This topmost layer, right? Because this is where we were kind of creating the body of the modal. We also have a beak here that we don't need. So, right, check it out. Here's our modal instance, which has its own beak. It comes with one, but we've also got one that we made for this component. So we can get rid of that. We no longer need that. We do not need a fill. We don't need any space between or padding. And the shadow, which we know we also don't need, right? If we go into the interface, oh, I lied. There is a shadow here. We'll keep it. And all the more reason, right? All the more reason the date picker should be using modal, even if I didn't see it when I was inspecting. I think this is the move. So we'll keep the shadow. Modal comes with a shadow, and it is spelled wrong, and we will correct that. Come on, Figma. Wow, that was really poorly placed little selection menu. Okay, cool. So we've got that, but we lost all of our overrides in the process. But I'm gonna, hold firm on that opinion that it's better than asking folks. I mean, you know what? No, it's really hard to talk in absolutes like that. What I was going to say was that doing it this way, totally refactoring an existing component is better than creating a new one off to the side and then asking people to switch. I would say maybe most of the time that's true, but there's probably going to be circumstances where you want to do the opposite. It's better to build that, new fresh version off to the side and then do what I demoed earlier where, you put the red X emoji in the title, you give it a pink background so folks know in the asset panel which one they should be using, and eventually deprecate it. And I think the reason why I say that that's less optimal than the other one is because, and this is maybe just a me thing, but I'm curious what other folks, if you're watching this, what your experience has been. But in my experience, having kind of like, to be deprecated components hanging out in the asset panel, like it's really easy to let those hang out for longer than they should. You really need to have a plan. And this is like notes to my future self, right? If you're going to have a legacy version and a new version available at the same time, you really got to be firm and like have a solid plan about like a date, like make a date, put it on the calendar, put it in that component description, right? Like if this was that one method, I would add something like will be officially archived or will be deleted, just very plain language on June 2nd, tomorrow, right? And stick to it, right? Use, especially if you've got I'm trying to remember if this feature, let's look. I want to see if Figma pricing, I want to see if everybody has component analytics. But I recently used this at work. Analytics. Okay. Org plan only. So not if you're on the professional plan, which is a shame. But what I did recently was I used the analytics to see, I was just trying to track down instances and get a list of files that I knew were live, right? There was a bunch of files that I came up with that hadn't been touched in months, which safe to assume it's like, that work is over. Nobody's in those files. The work's been done. The engineering team has finished referencing it. What needed to be built has gotten built. But I was interested in seeing, kind of files that were hot, that people were in. There was activity, designers were working, or engineers were referencing them, PMs were in them. And then kind of get a count of instances like, oh, wow, there's like 60 date pickers, right? And then figuring out who owns this file and saying like, hey, there's like X instances of this one component. I see you using them here. I want to let you know there's a new version of this component. I am available to help you make those swaps. And like, I don't want to burden you with, if you lose overrides, I am more than happy to be the one to go back and like do that cleanup work. I don't want to put that on the designer. Their job is to push the product forward and to be creative and be thinking about like the UX. They shouldn't have to be doing more of that. The less like maintenance, housekeeping they do, the better. That's why design ops exists, right? Or partially. But that's a big part of my job at least. So that's where the analytics can be helpful. And yeah, if you go that route of having the deprecated component available for a while, I think that's kind of a good way to do it. But yeah, setting that date of like, we are deleting this. Please don't use it after that. And we are going to be firm on it. But yeah, I think for this kind of scenario, even if every single override gets lost, this would be my preference. And you can still use that same strategy of using the analytics to track this down and see like, okay, what did we lose? And you can kind of do it file by file, it doesn't have to be a huge chore. There might even be something fancy you could build with the Automator plugin that would help you not only accept the updates to the instance, but then also like, hey, take the override information and plug it in to the new instances after those have been brought in. So yeah, cool. We've refactored the month picker and it's using modal. Feels good, feels right. I think, you know, we could do another refactor next week, or I'm sorry, 2 weeks from now. So what date would that be? Next stream falls on the 15th of June. I'll come up with another option for what could be worked on. If you've got ideas, like put them in the comments. You know, it doesn't have to be just coming from my brain. Yeah, and if you're new to this stream series, my newsletter subscribers, they get to vote on what I work on. I'll present 2 options every stream, and then on the off weeks, right? So I mentioned next stream is on June 15th, so June 8th is when I'll send out kind of a summary of what got done in this stream for folks who didn't join live for whatever reason. You know, they can still be up to speed, get the written notes of what got done, and it's kind of nice actually. I'll link to like certain timestamps in the video, so that way if there is a point of interest for them, they can kind of just tune into that clip rather than watching the whole half hour. So yeah, I'll have a link in the video description, a link to sign up to the newsletter, and yeah, thanks for watching. See you in a couple